The morning sun had barely crept above the Solomon Sea when 16 American P-38 Lightning fighters roared to life on the Henderson Field runway at 7:25 a.m. on April 18, 1943. In exactly 2 hours and 35 minutes, these pilots would attempt what every military strategist considered impossible: intercept and kill the most protected man in the Imperial Japanese Navy, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, over 400 miles from their base, at the absolute limit of their aircraft's range. The lead pilot, Major John Mitchell, checked his watch one final time. They had no margin for error. Not 1 minute. Not 1 gallon of fuel. Not 1 degree off course. If they arrived 30 seconds late, Yamamoto would live. If they burned too much fuel in combat, they would never make it home. If they were spotted too early, 18 Japanese Zero fighters would tear them apart. What made this morning different from every other mission in the Pacific War was a single decoded message, intercepted just 4 days earlier. The Americans knew exactly where Yamamoto would be, exactly when he would be there, and exactly how vulnerable he would be for precisely 10 minutes. But knowing and doing were two devastatingly different things. Admiral Yamamoto wasn't just any Japanese commander. He was the architect of Pearl Harbor, the strategic genius who had brought America to its knees on December the 7th, 1941. He was the man who had promised to dictate peace terms in the White House. More importantly, he was perhaps the only Japanese leader both respected and feared equally by American military commanders. While other Japanese admirals relied on courage and tradition, Yamamoto understood modern warfare, carrier tactics, and most dangerously, he understood America. The intercepted message had arrived at Pacific Fleet Intelligence on April 14th. It detailed Yamamoto's inspection tour of forward bases in the Solomon Islands, complete with arrival times, departure times, and the exact number of escorts. The admiral would be flying in a Mitsubishi G4M bomber, escorted by 6 Zero fighters, arriving at Balal Island at 9:35 a.m. on April 18th. When the decoded message reached Admiral Chester Nimitz's desk, he faced a moral dilemma that would haunt American military leadership for decades. Assassination of enemy commanders was considered beyond the pale of civilized warfare. But this was Yamamoto. This was the man whose brilliant mind had cost thousands of American lives and might cost thousands more. The decision went all the way to President Roosevelt. The answer came back in 2 words: get Yamamoto. If you're finding this story as gripping as we are here at the Old Breed channel, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. These incredible stories of military history deserve to be remembered and shared. But how do you kill a man who travels with fighter escorts, surrounded by hundreds of Japanese aircraft, in territory completely controlled by the enemy? The answer lay in the P-38 Lightning, the only American fighter with the range to reach Yamamoto's route and return, barely. Major Mitchell spent 3 sleepless nights calculating fuel consumption, wind speeds, and navigation points. The margin was terrifying. With specially fitted drop tanks, the P-38s could fly 900 to 1,000 miles. The round trip to the intercept point was 800 miles. That left enough fuel for maybe 15 minutes of combat. Maybe. The navigation problem was even worse. They would fly at 50 feet above the ocean to avoid radar detection, with no landmarks, no radio navigation, just compass and clock. Mitchell plotted 5 precise legs to the journey, each with exact headings and times. If they drifted 5 miles off course over 400 miles of ocean, they would miss Yamamoto entirely. 18 pilots were selected for the mission, though only 16 would ultimately fly. They were told nothing about their target, only that it was vital, that absolute radio silence must be maintained, and that anyone who turned back would face court-martial. 4 pilots were designated as killers: Captain Thomas Lanphier, Jr., Lieutenant Rex Barber, Lieutenant Besby Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond Hine. Their only job was to destroy the bomber carrying Yamamoto. The other 12 pilots, led by Mitchell, would engage the Zero escorts and protect the killers. As the 16 P-38s rolled down the runway that morning, each pilot carried the weight of an impossible equation. Everything had to work perfectly. The weather had to hold. The navigation had to be flawless. Yamamoto had to be on time. The drop tanks had to function. The Zeros had to be caught off guard. The odds were so slim that Admiral William "Bull" Halsey, when approving the mission, reportedly said he doubted they would ever see Mitchell's pilots again. For 2 hours, the American fighters skimmed the waves in radio silence, maintaining precise formation despite the turbulence and spray. Mitchell navigated by dead reckoning, checking his watch obsessively, adjusting course at exact intervals. Below them, sharks scattered from their shadows. Above them, towering cumulus clouds provided occasional cover. At 8:34 a.m., they made their first turn, heading 305 degrees. At 8:57, another turn to 290 degrees. Each pilot fought the urge to climb, to look around, to break the monotony of endless blue water rushing past at 200 miles per hour. Lieutenant Doug Canning's supercharger failed an hour into the flight. He turned back with his wingman, reducing the force to 14 planes. Then McClanahan's drop tanks wouldn't feed. He too turned back with his wingman. They were down to 12. 2 hours and 9 minutes into the flight, Mitchell spotted the coast of Bougainville, exactly where it should be, exactly when it should be there. His navigation had been perfect. But perfect navigation meant nothing if Yamamoto was late or early, or if he had changed his route. Mitchell led the flight in a gentle climb to 10,000 feet, still maintaining radio silence. They had perhaps 10 minutes of fuel for combat. Perhaps. Then Lieutenant Doug Canning, not the same Canning who had turned back, but another pilot with the same last name, broke radio silence with 3 words that changed history. "Bogies, 11 o'clock. There. Exactly where they were supposed to be, exactly when they were supposed to be there, were 2 Japanese bombers and 6 Zero fighters descending toward Balal airfield. What happened next unfolded in less than 5 minutes, but would be debated by historians for the next 80 years. Lanphier and Barber rolled into their attack dive, drop tanks tumbling away as they pushed their P-38s to maximum power. The Zeros, caught completely by surprise at low altitude, scrambled to respond. Yamamoto's bomber, piloted by Chief Petty Officer Takeo Kotani, immediately dove for the jungle canopy, seeking the protection of the trees. Barber lined up behind the lead bomber, his 6 50 caliber machine guns and 2 20mm cannons, creating a convergent stream of destruction. The bomber's right engine exploded, then its right wing. The massive aircraft, carrying the most important military mind in Japan, cartwheeled into the jungle of Bougainville. But was Yamamoto in that bomber? 2 bombers had been spotted. Which one carried the Admiral? Lanphier claimed he had shot down the second bomber, the one that crashed in the jungle. Barber claimed he had shot down both bombers. For years, both pilots would argue over who had actually killed Yamamoto, a debate that would never be fully resolved. What mattered in that moment was that both Japanese bombers were down. One had crashed in the jungle, one in the ocean. The Zeros, recovering from their surprise, swarmed after the Americans, but Mitchell's covering force held them off. Lieutenant Raymond Hine's P-38 was hit and exploded. He was the only American casualty of the mission, though his death would be overshadowed by the magnitude of what had been accomplished. As the surviving P-38s turned for home, fuel gauges hovering near empty, they still didn't know for certain if they had succeeded. Had Yamamoto been on one of those bombers? Had he survived the crash? The 11 surviving American fighters landed at Henderson Field with virtually empty tanks. Mitchell's aircraft had less than 30 gallons remaining, perhaps 5 minutes of flight time. For 2 days, the Americans waited for confirmation. Then, Japanese radio traffic exploded with encrypted messages. Coast watchers reported unusual Japanese naval activity, ships returning to Rabaul, high-ranking officers gathering. On April 21st, Japanese radio announced that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had met a heroic death while directing forward operations. The architect of Pearl Harbor was dead. A Japanese search party had found Yamamoto's body the day after the crash, still strapped in his seat, hand on his sword, 2 bullet wounds, one in his shoulder, one in his jaw. He had been thrown clear of the wreckage, but died instantly or within moments of the crash. The jungle heat and humidity had already begun its work when they found him, but there was no mistaking the uniform, the medals, or the man who had worn them. The death of Yamamoto sent shockwaves through the Japanese military that went far beyond the loss of one leader. If the Americans could intercept and decode their most secret communications, if they could reach out 400 miles and pluck their most protected commander from the sky, then nowhere was safe. No one was safe. Japanese morale, already battered by Midway and Guadalcanal, plummeted further. Yamamoto had been more than a military leader. He had been a symbol of Japanese invincibility, a strategic genius who understood both war and diplomacy. His replacement, Admiral Manechi Koga, while competent, lacked Yamamoto's vision and his understanding of American psychology. But perhaps the most profound impact was on Japanese codes and communications. The successful interception forced the Japanese to realize their codes were compromised, though they never fully grasped the extent of American code-breaking capabilities. This knowledge, this constant doubt about their communication security, would hamper Japanese operations for the remainder of the war. The 16 pilots who flew the mission were sworn to secrecy. The United States could not reveal that it had broken Japanese codes. For months, American propaganda suggested that coast watchers had spotted Yamamoto's plane, maintaining the fiction that protected the real secret: the American ability to read Japanese naval codes. Major John Mitchell received the Navy Cross for his flawless navigation and leadership. Lanphier and Barber also received the Navy Cross, though their competing claims about who actually shot down Yamamoto would divide them for the rest of their lives. Rex Barber would spend decades trying to prove his case, even undergoing hypnosis to recover his memories of those crucial seconds. In 1985, the wreckage of Yamamoto's bomber was discovered in the jungle of Bougainville. The pattern of bullet holes seemed to support Barber's account, but by then, both pilots had spent 40 years defending their versions of events. What remained undisputed was the extraordinary achievement of Operation Vengeance. 16 pilots had flown to the absolute limit of their aircraft's range, navigated 400 miles of open ocean without radio or navigational aids, intercepted an enemy commander protected by fighters in enemy territory, and brought most of their force home safely. It was, as Admiral Nimitz later said, one of the most perfectly executed military operations of the war. The ethical implications of the mission would be debated for generations. Was the targeted killing of an enemy commander assassination or a legitimate act of war? The Roosevelt administration justified it by arguing that Yamamoto was a combatant, traveling in a military aircraft in a combat zone. He was not assassinated in his bed or at a peace conference, but while actively commanding Japanese forces. Yet the mission set precedents that would echo through subsequent conflicts. If military commanders were legitimate targets, what about political leaders? What about industrial leaders crucial to the war effort? Where did legitimate military operations end and assassination begin? For the pilots who flew the mission, such philosophical debates were secondary to a simpler truth. They had been given an impossible task and had accomplished it. They had flown beyond the edge of what their aircraft could do, found a needle in an oceanic haystack, and eliminated the one Japanese leader who might have prolonged the war by years. Lieutenant Besby Holmes, one of the killer flight pilots, perhaps summarized it best years later. "We didn't think about history or ethics or any of that. We thought about fuel gauges and navigation points and not missing our chance. We had one shot, one opportunity to get the man who planned Pearl Harbor. We took it." The death of Yamamoto didn't end the war in the Pacific. 18 more months of brutal fighting remained, but it removed from the board the one Japanese strategist who truly understood both his enemy and the nature of modern naval warfare. His successors would make mistakes Yamamoto never would have made, fight battles Yamamoto would have avoided, and ultimately fail to find the negotiated peace Yamamoto had always known was Japan's only hope for survival. Operation Vengeance proved that in modern warfare, no one was beyond reach. With intelligence, planning, and the right technology, even the impossible became possible. 400 miles of open ocean, 18 Zero fighters, and the entire Japanese military structure couldn't protect Yamamoto from 16 determined American pilots flying at the ragged edge of their machine's capabilities. The mission remains a testament to the power of intelligence, the importance of precision planning, and the courage of pilots willing to fly into near certain death on the promise that their navigation would be perfect, their timing exact, and their enemy precisely where he was supposed to be. Did you know that the pilots of Operation Vengeance were never allowed to fly together again in combat? The military feared that if they were shot down and captured, they might reveal under torture that American had broken Japanese codes. Share this video with someone who appreciates these untold stories of military history, and subscribe to the Old Breed channel for more incredible accounts of the warriors who changed history. Leave us a comment below. Did you know about this impossible mission that eliminated Japan's most brilliant military strategist? What other impossible military operations would you like us to explore? The 16 P-38 fighters that took off that April morning accomplished what no one thought possible. They reached out across 400 miles of hostile ocean and changed the course of the Pacific War with 30 seconds of devastating gunfire. In those 30 seconds, the man who had awakened the sleeping giant at Pearl Harbor met the very force he had unleashed, American determination to achieve the impossible, no matter the odds, no matter the distance, no matter the cost. Operation Vengeance wasn't just the death of an admiral. It was proof that in the age of intelligence and technology, even the most protected targets could be reached, even the most impossible missions could be accomplished, and even the most brilliant military minds could be stopped by 16 pilots, perfect navigation, and the will to fly beyond the possible into the realm of the barely survivable. The ghost of Yamamoto would haunt Japanese military planning for the rest of the war, not because of what he might have done, but because his death proved that American intelligence could peer into the most secret Japanese communications. That American reach extended anywhere in the Pacific, and that American determination to win had no limits, recognized no sanctuary, and would stop at nothing to achieve victory.